Hi, I'm Greg Dell here with attorney Stephen Jessup, and we're going to talk about cardiologists, cardiac surgeons, and long-term disability insurance claims. And in this video, Steve, we'll talk about the duties of the occupation, how that relates to the definition of disability, and then some of the other issues that we've seen having represented hundreds of cardiologists over the past years at all different stages of a disability claim. So, Stephen, first talking about what a cardiologist, there's different duties of different types of cardiologists in terms of what they do. Why is that important, and what types of different cardiologists have you worked with in the past?
Well, it's so important because that's the context of how the insurance company is going to take a look at your claim. You know, this idea of, how your condition prevents you from doing the material and substantial duties of your job. So how you perform your medicine is really how it sets it forth. And that's generally speaking, they're going to pull CPT codes to see what you bill, see what you do. And in the past, we've run the whole gamut. You and I have had experience working on, clients' cases together where there's some that just do office visits and then refer out any procedures. We've represented interventional cardiologists that in a group setting, one of the other doctors gives them all the surgeries and all they do is the surgical side, and then doctors that do a combination of it. So it runs a lot more diversity than I think a lot of people, and I think the insurance company would even really consider, depending on who you work for yourself, groups, a hospital system. So there's really no such thing, as much as sometimes insurance companies look for a national economy, idea standard of what exactly a cardiologist does until you really get into the nitty-gritty of what the billing codes are, because the billing codes actually tell, the story of what this doctor does, day in, day out.
And it's really important, the occupation, because a typical definition of disability, at least during the first 2 years, is unable to perform the substantial material duties of your occupation. And you brought up a great point about looking at the CPT codes. The challenging cases that we've had are the cardiologists who do interventional cardiology and do office practice cardiology. And then they get to a point where they say, I can't really do the interventional cardiology procedures anymore, but I think maybe I can continue in office practice, or they do continue in office practice. How does that get evaluated by the disability insurance company?
It's interesting because there's also a timing element to that. Before we started this, you and I discussed a client we represented years ago where worked in a practice setting, and he was the interventional cardiologist in the sense that all the other doctors, they did the exams, all he was really doing was doing the surgeries. He left that practice and was on his own for like 5-6 years. And when he filed his claim before hiring us, he presented it as an interventional cardiologist because, that's what I did. But it was that evaluation of the CPT codes that showed that for years, his money was made, most of his time and money was made in regular cardiological exams, procedures, not like surgery. So the insurance company, he was trying to argue, I'm totally disabled under this policy because I'm not an interventional cardiologist, now I'm just a cardiologist. Well, their position was, no, you're only partially disabled because you still are performing material duties. And they determine those material duties on that billing. So you really need to be careful. You were saying with 24 months, definitions of disability, that's what can happen if you work for a hospital system or a group and you have an employer-provided policy. But under your private disability policies, and from our experience, a lot of the doctors have very old policies that have lots of favorable language for them, where they can still collect a full benefit while still practicing medicine. But the insurance companies are going to really take a hawkeye approach at looking at your billing history and seeing really how much of your time and money, if you, at the end of the day, is tied into doing the procedures, surgery procedures, or office visit stuff. So it can become very complex, and how you set up your claim when you're filing the application can really determine if you're going to be able to maximize the actual value of your policy.
Now, a lot of the claim denials that we've handled for cardiologists have especially recently been structuring around this national economy definition of the occupation. And it ends up happening a lot with the cardiologists that perform interventional cardiology or perform surgery, because these companies kind of forget about the fact that they're doing surgical procedures and look at the general definition of cardiology. There's even some that go so general just to say medical degree. I mean, that
Correct.
broad. And the person who really suffers is the interventional cardiologist and the cardiac surgeon, because often those particular types of cardiologists are disabled because they can't go into the operating room anymore. And the disability carrier makes the argument to say, well, you could be a cardiologist and just do patient evaluations and diagnostics, and you don't have to be in the OR. And we don't disagree that you can't do the surgeries, but under this policy of national economy definition of a cardiologist, we think you could still be a cardiologist. So how do you tackle that argument that we've seen so often and been successful on?
You know, that's a real generalized one. You see that a lot in like employer provided policies where they really try to diminish it, and they'll say, you know, if you're a doctor, it's anything within the scope of your license. Well, that's a pretty large scope, but obviously you specialized in something, so you know you really do kind of become, you know, not to diminish it, but a one-trick pony. You know, you can't expect a cardiologist to all of a sudden practice, you know, internal medicine, right? They're specialties for a reason. And I think it's really attacking that level of, you know, simplification and getting into the nuts and bolts of it. And I think when you're looking in the medical profession itself too, there's always this underlying theme and idea of patient safety. You know, especially with cardiac surgeons and interventional cardiologists, people's lives are in your hands, like while you are working. You have a bad day at work, someone can die. So there's this overriding theme of patient safety. So not only how is it impacting your well-being and how you can do your job, but how could this impact your patients as well? You really got to know the different carriers and the different types of policies you're going to write, because every insurance company has its own kind of MO in the way they will handle things. So it does take a level of care and planning, especially under the employer-provided policies. But generally speaking, those employer-provided policies are very favorable to the insurance company. That being said, language for doctors is generally much better than what you're going to see for anyone else who works in the hospital. But I've represented plenty of doctors who not only have their own private policies, but policies they got through their employers. And generally speaking, since that's paying a percentage of their income, those benefits are much larger than the private ones. So those are the cases that are always getting the most scrutiny, always getting the most review, and always trying to find a way to deny, because at the end of the day, under that type of policy, there's really not a financial disincentive for your insurance company to deny your claim.
So, but in terms of the hard facts and in terms of overcoming this national economy thing, especially with the cardiac surgeons and the interventional cardiacs, is to say, look, you can't classify them as cardiologists. Yes, they do procedures on the heart, but really you need to look at them as surgeons. So your classification of cardiologists is wrong, because cardiologist for the most part is an office-based practice, and the subspecialty of going into the operating room is a surgeon. And that's been a very successful argument, however, completely overlooked and intentionally overlooked by the disability insurance company. And in addition to presenting that information with tons of medical and occupational support, we'll also work with a vocational expert who will review all of the skills required of a surgeon or any doctor that does surgical procedures versus that of an office-based practice doctor. And we've used that technique as well to achieve a lot of success when it comes to overcoming this national economy definition of disability. And Stephen, you spoke about these differences of these policies, and you know, a lot of cardiologists have their own policies, but with the transitions of all of these group practices buying up all of these individual doctors, many of these doctors, unfortunately, either didn't get enough individual coverage or felt that they could drop their coverage because they got a group benefit. And the stakes are a lot higher with a group policy because you just don't have as many rights when you have a policy governed by ERISA versus a policy governed by your individual disability. And we've talked about the pros and cons of all of those, and we have other videos on our website about that I encourage the cardiologist who's watching this video to take a look at that, just so they know a little bit about what they're up against when dealing with a group policy versus an individual policy. You know, I also wanted the cardiologists who are watching this video to be really educated even before they contact us to discuss their claim. And one of the best things that we always recommend is to go to our website and take a look at their disability insurance company and research them through our site and see about all the past lawsuits that have gone on that we've written about, cases that we've handled, look at the questions and answers, and then spend some time watching our other videos about the different types of issues that come up with your specific company. So, through our experience of having represented hundreds of cardiologists and thousands of doctors, we've basically seen everything. But the best thing we do for the cardiologists is to give us a call, whether it's you, myself, any of other lawyers. We want to provide you with an initial free review of your policy, of your denial letter if you've been denied. No matter what stage your claim's at, we'll provide you with a free initial consultation. We'll let you know right away whether or not we think we can assist you. We're available all over the country, and we look forward to the opportunity to speak with you should you need us in the future.